Hello and welcome to the garden. Well, I'm planting out again today, but to be honest, I'm starting to run out of space. There's still plenty of bare soil here, but I think all of it is earmarked for one crop or another and then some. Now, this doesn't normally happen. Last year we made some changes to the garden and we actually made it a bit smaller. And I haven't done a very good job of adapting to the new scale of the plot. I also made a bit of a mistake last autumn and planted way more shallots than I should have done. So they've taken up space that was designated for another crop, and that has a knock-on effect all around the garden. So I got far too many alliums in the ground, and that's making it a bit tricky to find space for all of the things that I've already sown. So I'm going to get to the point probably mid-May where the entire plot is filled, or at least I think so. And of course that's a lovely thing to see a fully used plot. But I'm then going to have to be paying a little bit more attention to having stuff ready to go in the ground as soon as the first crops start coming out. So those would be things like the broad beans and then probably some peas. When they come out, I've got to have stuff ready to go in there. So whereas I think in previous seasons we've been a little bit spoilt by having plenty of space. I mean, we still got plenty of room to grow everything that we need to grow. I just need to be a little bit of a better gardener and use it more efficiently. And definitely what I don't want to do again is plant 3 beds up with shallots and overwintering onions and garlic and then get myself into trouble as soon as spring comes along. We also took a bed out for yet more asparagus, and yeah, we really like the asparagus. I mean, it's not a huge crop that we get out of it, of course, and that's really not an efficient use of space, but we like it. So I mean, that's okay, but it has reduced the growing space a little bit. So yeah, it's a little bit challenging this year. So whereas in the past I wouldn't worry too much about intercropping and catch crops, this year I'm thinking a lot more about that and how to squeeze stuff in space that perhaps in previous years I wouldn't have bothered to make use of. So today I'm putting in yet more broad beans. I've already got the overwintering broad beans there well into their flowering period now, and I hope the cold hasn't had too bad an effect on the flowers. But I've then got a row of dwarf broad beans up against the fence. Now I need to be able to get along the back of the borders here in order to access the fruit trees that we're training along the fence. But that space right at the bottom, that's kind of dead space. So it's a good place to have put the dwarf broad beans because nothing else is going to be in there and they're not going to be getting in the way. I then planted out 4 more rows of beans. Those were masterpiece, and they're in the north border. It's going to be a little bit shady. That will get afternoon sun, but I think as conditions warm up, I think they might actually quite like it there. So they're fine, but a little bit like the shallots, I've got far too many broad beans. So I've got to find places to put them without taking up more bed space. So here's where they're going. So this border has been divided up into 3 beds. I mean, these dividers don't serve a particularly useful purpose, except that by dividing it up, it helps me to plan how I'm going to use the space and what's going to go in here. But actually this entire border was supposed to be growing squash this year. But of course I planted out far too many shallots, so my seed sown onions, they're in the end section of this border. So that's not getting squashed, but these two sections here will get some squash plants in 2 or 3 weeks time. But those plants aren't going to need all of the space to start with. So I think I can get away with putting the broad beans along the boundary here. So I put 3 rows in, and alongside these dividers, and I'm hoping that by the time the squash have spread out, that these are already cropping and will be cleared away. So what I'm doing at the moment then is filling in little gaps to make the most of the space. And to be honest, it's not something I'm particularly good at. I've never had to think too hard about that because we've had more than enough space. These 3 rows that I've already put in, 2 here and 1 at the other end of this bed, those are the crimson flowered broad bean. And then I've got more of the dwarf bean, the Sutton. So, I mean, this is not something I need to show again. I've already planted quite a few broad beans on previous videos. Well, these are certainly in need of moving out of these cells, but I must say I do like the way these cells produce really good root down the bottom here. So I'm setting those plants a little bit deeper than they were in the cells and giving them a good firming in. So that's the broad beans done, and I think that is my last planting of broad beans for this year. I'm pretty sure I don't have the space for any more. So along the front of this part of the border, I'm going to lay out some lettuce. So I've got here the bloody cos or spotted cos, and this one I think must be 4 seasons. Now, to be honest, these have been hanging around far too long in these pots, but they're actually quite nice looking plants. So I'm going to lay these out in front here, and these will definitely be gone by the time the squash are spreading out across this bed. Well, this is a little bit pot bound. It's not quite as bad as I thought, but yeah, it's long past time this was in the ground. I'm going to take that old leaf off, that's not good. Well, I don't like to see them with as much root on as that. That's not good gardening, really. That's a mistake, and I should have had these out under fleece a couple of weeks ago, but I never got around to it, and they will be okay here. They will settle down, and you know, this is a pretty quick crop, so it's not a huge problem, but it's not ideal to let them go quite as long as this. They look like they should have been out 2 weeks ago, I would have thought. Give these a good drop of water. They were rather dry in those pots, and that's not entirely surprising given the amount of root that was in there. So these beetroot seedlings are doing fairly well in here, I think. They've settled down, they've got their roots down, and there's new growth on them. And I think they're doing fine. Maybe this one's not great, and I might replace that one. I've got a spare that I could use, although it looks like it's growing. Now, these are growing quite slowly because, of course, April's been pretty cold. They've been protected okay by the fleece, but they're not going to be growing particularly quickly. So if I show you those in the cold frame, they're much further ahead. The beetroot in the cold frame is doing a lot better. They look slightly bedraggled because they've only just been watered, but I think these are going to crop quite a bit ahead of those in the bed, and that is ideal. Now, these were sown on the same day and planted out on the same day, so it just shows the benefit of giving them that extra warmth in the cold frame. So while these beetroot are taking their time to get going, I think I've got just enough time to slip in a couple of rows of lettuce between these plants. So I've got some small plants here. Again, these could have gone out a week or two ago, and I should have done that, but actually they're not bad little plugs. There's quite a bit of root down the bottom, but I think these will do nicely when they get their feet into the soil here. So I'm just going to plant these between the beetroot plants, and I think these should mature in time so that they don't get in the way of the beetroot. And of course I can take the lettuce out anytime I want, really. I don't have to wait for large mature plants. This is just a random mixture of varieties. These are just some that I pricked out of my first tray of cut and come again lettuce. These are the sorts of lettuce that are good to harvest as individual leaves, so I can always keep picking these and keep these plants rather small, which is ideal for this purpose. So I did decide to replace that small one in the corner. This is with one of the spares that I'd potted up just in case, and in fact I've now potted up the one that was there. Again, you never know when you might want a spare, and it's much nicer to have a spare plant to drop in when something goes wrong than to have a gap in the row. But anyway, I rather like this now. This is a much more efficient use of this space because these are going to take quite a long time to spread out to the point where these lettuce need to come out. So yeah, I'm much happy with that, and now I will cover these back over with the fleece, and I would think in a week or two I could dispense with the fleece altogether. So I'm going to carry on with a few more jobs like this, filling in the gaps, planting around the edges, and trying to make a slightly more efficient use of my space. And I'm going to have to do quite a lot more of this than I have in the past, and I'm going to have to do quite a lot of that this year because I made such a mess of my early planting scheme. So anyway, that's it for this video. Thanks very much for watching, and bye for now.